Right now with capitalism, all of the gains in automation, it goes to the owner class. All you have
Is
to
it
do
playing?
is have everyone
Yeah,
be an
it's
owner,
playing.
and
Go
now
ahead.
suddenly any gain in automation is a gain for everybody. If you grow just one thing, it may not grow as well as if it grows with another thing. A good example of that is called the Three Sisters method of farming.
There is definitely multi-apartment buildings or multi-families that do passive design.
$100 million that they gave to Joe Rogan that they would kind of be out if they breach contract. Is that a bigger number, or is 2 billion a bigger number?
I don't know,
It's
Zach.
a tough
This
one.
is
I know,
really hard.
and maybe
Yes.
comparing numbers is not Jeremy Strong's. Gotta go kill a Jenny.
I still don't think you should kill her. I don't think it's a good idea.
It's a ghost, dude. Welcome back, everybody, to Bread Theory. My name is Zach. I'm your host, and tonight joining me, as is often the case, is Dan Platt, the head of the Albany Greens Party. Green Party, not Greens Party. Excuse me.
And Albany, not Albany.
Albany? Oh my God, I feel like an idiot. Yeah,
Where we eat steamed hams.
steamed hams, huh?
Oh yeah.
Oh, eh. All right. Well, guess everyone needs their culinary traditions. How are you doing tonight, Dan?
Just peachy. Skied this morning, and then in the
Skied.
afternoon, I watched with the Socialist Party. We had a movie day, which we do once every other month. We watched a Chinese war movie where the enemy is the Americans.
Oh my goodness.
It's a Korean War movie, but from the other side,
I see.
or the Chinese side. The Battle of Qingha Lake, which is in the dead of winter, and it's uh, it's a very tropey, kind of cringe, but action-packed action war movie. Kind of like an '80s American war movie, but it's made recently in China. It has a lot of drone shots. They
Oh,
used a
interesting.
lot of sweeping drone shots. Um,
It's kind of cool.
and some interesting shot work. They do this thing where like they show all the faces of like the people in the platoon, and it's like the Brady Bunch as they're all kind of like looking at the sky because like it's constantly you basically have this company moving in the position and the American warplanes are always kind of overhead or doing sweeps, and in the constant, threat of being bombed to oblivion. Um, and eventually, but it is a big like trap that the context is the First Marine Division is like moving at 3 kilometers a day because the command general knows he's walking into a trap. But MacArthur is kind of ordering him to advance to the Chinese Korean border.
Gotcha.
And so he's going as slow as possible so that when the trap is triggered, he's able to kind of pull back easily. And that's what happens. But a million Chinese streaming down a mountain.
Wow.
So it kind of remakes those moments, but also being very hammy because there are some brothers. Of course, it's a personal story. Some brothers,
Sure.
three brothers, and some other folks. Yeah,
That sounds fun.
yeah, it was mostly fun, and yeah, and a whole lot of stuff. I've been hanging out with lots of friends. I found a comrade to do music with.
Oh, that's cool.
So eventually, if we practice enough, we start doing that punk band stuff.
That'd be
Find some
awesome.
other people. It could be a start.
Do you have
Um,
a name in the works already?
no way.
Okay.
But no name until it's at least 4 people, and we're a quartet. Um, but just the whole like, I want to be a doer. I want to
Hmm.
do stuff. I want to be successful organizing, but I'm way more comfortable being support and being a planner. And I'm reminded by someone who is one of these doers that like she's a mess and she is only effective because she has this other guy who I've never met who's behind the scenes planning. and working as her support. And not that it always has to be like a rule of two binary, but it's like I need someone who's a doer to work with me. I need a partner if I'm going to start some community project and go with it. It just can't be me because I'm just too much of an ideas guy in my head, and I'm not as much as I want to be a good communicator, and that's literally spent 6 years trying to be a good communicator. I still don't see myself as someone who can really rally people and convince and get people excited for something, because I guess there's too much of me that wants to avoid the call to action, because being an introvert, I don't like being told what to do. And so I avoid telling others what to do, even though call to action, like even as simple as like and subscribe, not if you feel like it, but do it. Join the Green Party, damn it. As much as like I want to do that, I don't want to come off too strong, because all the years I was bullied as a kid or something. I'm not going to dig into it, but it's probably whatever reasons exist. So I just wanted to muddle through that. Since I'm not like, I could be the chair of the local Green Party, but it's just like I'm not a doer. I can plan everything. I have a strategy, but I need partners who to do the outreach and do the things, because otherwise I have to drag myself out of the house to do it. It'll be easier when the weather's nicer, and I can bike around at leisure, but it's still a lot of work without a car. Otherwise I would hit neighborhoods and stuff like that. It would be a lot more convenient. I could still plan outings and by bus or bike. It's just,
it takes some more doing.
There's other stuff to do on the weekend, I guess. But there's other impediments. But I guess April will be a big month because we're petitioning, and I'll heavily consider making an effort to join the library board.
Oh, the library board. That's cool.
Yeah, that's the lowest hanging fruit, it looks like. Unless I shop around again to other nonprofits like the local community loan, not loan fund, but that would count, but the land trust. But I'm not so sure, I want to do my own thing, or there's new economy stuff to do. New economy stuff, building the new hegemony. There's all these ideas to put into practice, theory-wise.
Absolutely.
About hegemony and building new hegemony. And this comes from other YouTube videos as well, and essays. And in fact, actually, I wanted to start with this. Can we share my screen?
Yeah. Let's try doing that.
We can try that. Hold on. Share now.
Let me stop presenting, and we'll see if you can then take over.
Yeah, but I don't want to do the whole screen. Hold on. It's just an image. So I came across a video. I put it in the Facebook. I linked a message with Facebook and Anna Fern channel. And she has this video essay, which I actually found to be like new information. It wasn't the same old like, here's something I already knew about or read
On January 6, 2021, a group of Trump supporters stormed U.S. Capitol.
About culture, subcultures in our neoliberal capitalist paradigm. Let's see. Now it's open. No. Why won't it allow me? Okay, entire screen it is.
Yeah.
And okay. So I'll just make that big. Do you see it?
I see it. Yep.
Okay. So I actually made this because she didn't have one in her video. But she goes through about an hour describing the various subcultures in neoliberalism and how even though some of these subcultures seem to be opposites, they are in fact part of a whole. Why? And we can kind of tell because so many of them horseshoe around each other. And we kind of confuse political leanings or tendencies as these subcultures when they are not political, really. They can be put into a political program, but they're not really. They're subcultures within the culture that is late stage capitalism.
Sure.
And I kind of like it's like the political compass, but it's a cultural compass. And a way of organizing along the axes of realism and kind of consumerism. Because it's like there's consumerism, and what's the opposite of consumerism? Going off-grid? Well, off-grid can entail buying a lot of shit.
Yeah, right. There's so many prepper sites out there now.
Right. So it's a type of minimalism, but it's still consumer driven.
Mm-hmm.
And so like you can kind of see here. So we'll just go around the circle from off-grid. So you have the axis of minimalism and maximalism, and realism to mysticism. So on the realism side, you have the doomer that's a minimalist. I want to do as little as possible to contribute to capitalism or consumer to consume. Careerism, which is in the middle, which is, well, I'm going to do what I need to survive. You know, realism is just the belief that it's a grounded materialist belief that late stage capitalism is our system, it is reality, and we can't. It is a fatalistic or defeatist. Like there's no point in escaping it. We can't escape it. So either you believe you're a doomer and you think there's no escape, so you just don't believe in anything, and you're a doomer. A careerist, which is, well, there's nothing I can do about it, but I will do what I can to survive. And that means having a career. It means being in the rat race, but maybe only as far as I need to be. And then the hustler, which is, well, actually, capitalism is the only system. It's reality. It's water. What is water, actually? I'm a fish, and I don't know what water is. And I love it. I love being a fish.
Right.
And it's maximalist in that, it's like, I'm going to make as much money as possible. And careerism's the middle, because it's like, well, I want to make enough, that 80 grand, or as one meme puts it, the real middle-class lifestyle is you need like 200 grand, but that's if you include like, a yearly 10 grand vacation,
right,
saving up for college for 2 kids, raising 2 kids. It's including all of these things that make up the nuclear family image, which is a false consciousness anyway. So actually, I'll stick with the 70 grand or 60 grand per person being what matters, or what's enough, or at least that equivalent value. And on the other end, in mysticism, where it's the belief in beliefs, you have the minimalist version, which is trad life, which of course is like play acting. The middle is just wellness in general. I put manifest, but it's just wellness in general.
Yeah.
And on the right, it's I think I thought I changed this. I put it's dark enlightenment, but I think I have a new version where it's just I put tech bro. Think tech bro, because dark enlightenment is a very niche subculture,
like
which was just
sort of thing, or
yeah.
Right wing.
Well, dark enlightenment is like it's a mix of the Manosphere, Peterson. It's just very of a few years. But I think if we're going to talk about like the last 30 years of culture, I think technocracy, tech bro is probably more accurate. And it does, and it's close, and it overlaps with wellness. Think about how tech bros are so much into wellness and mysticism, new age. You have the tech millionaires who would try to cure their cancer with juice, as Tim
take the ivermectin
or what have you. Yeah. And it's because it's like we there's all these Atlantic articles that try to like figure out like what's the connection here. Well, the connection is late stage culture. Late stage capitalist culture, in that they're all mysticists. They put beliefs over materiality.
Yeah.
But we don't think that way because they believe in technology. It's like, the belief in technology for its own sake, though. or worse, that is actually, it's not for its own sake. It's towards being post-human, and that is just as delusional as trad life. And conspiracy culture links all of these subcultures together on that top axis, which I'll use my cursor. And in the middle, in between them, you simply have consumerism in a base way, and self-help in the dead center. But you have fandoms, Disney adults in the consumer maximalists. But between, you right, are they sometimes careerists, sometimes they're mysticists, sometimes a little bit of both.
That's true. That's very true.
There's a mix, and it's not like these are all. Like, if you're a careerist and you care about your career, it doesn't mean you also don't buy The Secret and believe in like attracting things, or being a loving astrology. It just means that these are all mapped, right? And it doesn't mean that they're a whole. They are not opposing each other, really. Though a doomer can say they're opposing, the tech bros. A lot of doomers work in tech. And a lot of off-gridders buy a lot of shit like as if they're in a fandom. They love certain consumer products, or they have to buy a lot of stuff to be an off-grid in the first place. Renewable energy even, or what have you. Now, the red things I put on the outside of this circle were just kind of my inklings as to like getting out of the culture. Like, where's the avant-garde, and how do we break out of this circle? Or what's the extreme version, at least, of these things? So a careerist can still kind of care about stuff, maybe be civically engaged. But if you're really too far in the capitalist realist hole, you're just an apathetic, bystander. If you're a doomer and you're angry enough, you'll become radicalized. If you are into traditional living, but maybe you're not going to do it in the kind of white supremacist or patriarchal mode that is tied to capitalist values, maybe you are into the slow living movement, which can be seen as separate and counter-capitalist culture. And so on. But I couldn't come up with anything that would be extreme version of a hustler. And I was kind of, and I'm jabbing in the dark at like post-humanism being the extreme outsider the avant-garde version of tech bro culture. But transhumanism is very much like it's beyond, but of techno futurism, and it is at least post-capitalist in its presentation.
What about for that bottom right corner? What about like multi-level marketing or something like that? It's a little more extreme than just hustle culture.
It's extreme,
and it's definitely all about consumer.
What makes it more extreme? Because I would just consider it as a part of hustle culture, because all of the appeals of MLM is the same as any other, like, just get the money,
I guess,
and maximize your income.
Yeah, I guess some hustlers are like, well, okay, now you got to buy my book, now you got to buy my, tickets to my next show, and this. So
unless we want to distinguish between the ethical and the unethical versions of these subcultures, I think that's muddying.
Okay,
that's unnecessary.
Consumer extreme realist.
Yeah. Not that there needs to be one, but
no, it's an interesting thought.
It's a fun thought experiment.
Yeah, I don't know.
So anyway, I really liked it. Link in the doobly doo. Yeah. Anna Fern. She's sounds Russian, but very, very smart. And it's a fine video essay. But she didn't make such a graphic, so I made one at work. So I'll be sharing that as I go.
Okay.
Yeah, and the other thing, which I'll discuss at least in talking, is I started this new book, The Long 20th Century. Usually you hear like the long 19th century, which is like talking about how like the 19th century started in the French Revolution and it ended with World War One. So it's the long century. Well, this is actually referring to not so much time, but cycles of capital accumulation. So you've got, are you aware of the fourth turning?
I'm somewhat familiar with that.
Somewhat.
Yeah,
Maybe we could.
is it the the weak men create hard times create strong
It's
men?
linked, but it's not the same. The thing you're referring to, and that white supremacists refer to, the reactionaries, is like from an actual, ironically, an Islamic historian from the Middle Ages. And if that's how far your conceptions of time and history and academia go, I mean, many reactionaries do kind of stop at the Renaissance
Sure.
when it comes to philosophy.
You can stop sharing your screen unless you want to go share the videos yourself.
Did I not? No. There we go. Okay. What am I about? Okay, so anyway, I brought up Before Turning, which was made up by marketers, but I wanted a materialist version of this because there's all these like patterns of history, but most like published versions in our culture is just unmaterialist or idealist about it. Maybe they speak, we can speak of cultural cycles. There's the Chronisiat curves, which are price cycles, but prices are not really a predictor or a way of like, you're overlaying all kinds of other stuff on this price curve, but it doesn't always line up and it's not really explanatory of anything, because what causes prices to go up or down is all kinds of things. It's endless. But what he's kind of coming at is accumulation cycles, and it's a way of categorizing the development of capitalism in 4 sections that overlap. So it's not just, and this is where most of these cycle things kind of fall flat, is that they kind of try to put exact dates onto it. And then also say at the same time, well, it averages 20 to 30 years. So they can say the next turning will be 2030 or something like that. And we're in the 4th one now, the crisis one. I guess we're in a crisis. It feels like it. We can say it. Yeah, it's also a long crisis. Right. It's a crisis but a crisis for what? America's crisis. It's so very, the problem with the 4th turning bros, they're marketing bros. And so, the main critique is that they only look at Anglo-American history.
Sure.
So it's so very myopic about like, aren't we the best? And this is like how we judge ourselves.
Yeah.
When really we're in a global system. So it just doesn't make any sense, because you can look at price curves like, well, that's global prices. What the fuck does that have to do with American history? But you can fit American history into capital accumulation cycles, and that we are the current hegemon. And the other 3, which lasted also 2 centuries each, or about a century and a half each. First, the Italian city-states.
Sure.
Then the Dutch. Then the British. Then us. And each cycle is basically made up of a century or so, or somewhat, of this power
of just total dominance,
accumulating capital by way of commodity production. But then, halfway through their cycle, they switch to banking, because commodity production reaches its limits, as Marx would detail.
Sure, yeah.
And they switched to banking, and they would continue to accumulate capital, but only through financial dealings.
It's just financial tools, yeah.
Which included lending money to the power that would replace them. Right? The Italians loaned money to the Dutch. The Dutch created their colonial empire and then started loaning money to the English. and then the English take over all their colonies. And then the English loan money to America
The colonies. Yeah.
post Civil War. And then we start loaning it back to them during the World Wars, or rather, all of their assets start transferring to America, to us, the global empire. And what's changing now, what's different about our time is that we are no longer, our financial dealings is not, we're not loaning our wealth out. It's actually other rising powers that are buying our debt. Right? I'm not through the whole intro, but he's getting to like, how is America different than the British or the Dutch? And like you expect that the next rising power, let's say China or Japan, we'd be pushing, after 1970, we'd be going into financializing our economy. We would be shifting our investments to commodity production elsewhere, or for other people to do, as China has been doing. But they're buying our debt. It's so weird. So it's hard to, it's sort of a leap to actually suggest that the process, the cycle is repeating exactly, and that China will be the next capital power, because right now they're in their capital accumulation phase and we're in our lending phase, but we're not really lending, because we keep getting other foreign investors to invest in America. Not directly in our factories, sometimes that's happening, but it's mostly in the buying of our debt. That's fascinating to me. Really makes you think.
It does really make you think, yes. I mean, could it be just because China is a little bit different of an economy, that their shift to hegemonic control would look different as well? Like there would be a different path than just us loaning them money or investing in their country?
Just as our dominance of the global system is different than the English's.
Yeah, right.
And each, as it passes, I think he's making the case that there was not really, the capital accumulation was not through innovation. Each power was simply copying the last one. The Dutch were just copying what the Italians were doing. The English copied what the Dutch were doing. And we copied what the English were doing. But we just happen to have our own continent to exploit.
Yeah. That is a big difference too.
And slave labor and all that stuff. Yeah. But not like the Dutch didn't use slaves. They all did. Right. And the Italian base of wealth was, of course, and things change with each cycle, and that like what commodities are being invested in, and what kinds of like things are being done.
Sure.
So all that's discussed. It's a thick book.
Yeah.
But he started with just the 20th century and realized like he couldn't really talk about the last cycle without figuring out the other three, and because it's a world system. And then the other thing that's really fascinating, which I think I'll make a new graphic, it's a simpler one, is how to distinguish in a rhetoric that, because I'm always of two minds about whether or not to conflate markets with capitalism, but it doesn't make intuitive sense to any normie, and there's actually a good reason for this. This Marxist points out that there's three levels to the global economy. There's a base level of life, basic life. Then markets are above that. Each level depends on the one below it. It's like a pyramid. But the markets depend on common life.
Right. And
capitalists depend on markets.
Right.
But the thing to understand that we should let every normie know, and they do kind of implicitly understand this, is that the capitalists are anti-market. As it is, capitalists and state power are one and the same. They don't exist without the other. Modern state formation and capital accumulation are roughly the same process of international competition while creating a global system of, capitalism, I guess. And that the difference is that we've always had capitalists in world history as we've had markets, but they weren't concentrated enough. You'd have your merchant king, or you'd have your Roman senator who was basically being a capitalist, but it would just be him and 10 others. It was only in the Italian city-states that enough capitalists existed in one city that they then became the government and started investing in their own administration, forming the modern state. Anyway, really, really fascinating stuff. So I'm glad it's recommended in this book club. So we'll see. I have a month to read it. We'll see how I do.
Yeah.
All right. So
I'd love to hear more about it. Cool.
So let's move on. We're going to talk two urbanist videos. One about just public housing failures in the 20th century. Looking at this Amsterdam. It's a very spiffy video.
Oh, you want the Amsterdam one? Yeah, let's do that.
And then we'll do the what's wrong with urbanist YouTube, basically,
Sure.
which is, spoiler alert. It's missing step 2.
Okay.
It's missing praxis.
1 second. Missing praxis. Okay. Gotcha. I have to find that last video though. 1 second.
Oh, do I need to share again?
No, I can find it. It's just the way that, for whatever reason, that Google Meets does it. Whatever tab I click to, that's the tab it shows.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't keep it locked on the tab. So,
But alternatively, I brought up 2 Malcolm X speeches so we could, since it is the last of Black History Month.
Here is.
It was now the time.
Maybe next week.
You say 2 Malcolm X ones?
Yeah, Malcolm X speeches.
Oh, that's cool.
Kind of important to my political consciousness raising.
Absolutely. Very important figure. All right. Well, here's the Amsterdam one. Let's watch that.
Part of this video was sponsored by Squarespace. This is the Belmer. It's a neighborhood in Amsterdam. Compared to the city's canals, brick architecture, and 6-story tall buildings, the Belmer looks different. Its concrete buildings are arranged like honeycombs. There's lots of green space and even a raised metro. It looks strange, but a few decades ago, it looked even stranger. This is not just any ordinary city neighborhood. Once upon a time, the Belmer was the city of the future. A city built in a park, a utopia in Amsterdam.
We moeten de geschiedenis niet willen herhalen. We moeten haar schrijven.
One day, it was the country's largest housing project.
But you have to change the mode of production first.
Another day, it became its largest, demolished one. In a time where the Netherlands' urban planning is borderline fetishized, the Belmer is considered by some its biggest urban planning failure. What is the Belmer? The Netherlands is not known for high-rise buildings. Its people are tall enough, so there's not much need for compensation. In the 60s, though, there was an exception.
Yea, high-rise estates dominated the building in this era. These years proved to be the time of peak housing production in the Netherlands and many other European countries.
After the Second World War, there weren't many homes, but there were lots of people who needed them.
Well,
all across Europe,
it was kind of
new
bombed
high-rise
out.
neighborhoods developed.
They had to build new.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they had to build new because, what else are you going to do? Just leave a pile of rubble? Yeah.
Neighborhoods became experiments in new types of living. Architects and planners believed the time of organic, bottom-up cities was over. It was now the time to build them top-down, artificially.
C.I.A.M is a group of the world's most leading urban planners and architects. We have designed the cities of the future. The population is too dense within the historic nuclei of cities. Structures built along transportation routes and around their intersections are detrimental to habitation. The ratio between the size of a population and the land area that it occupies can be entirely changed by the height of buildings. High buildings, set apart from one another, must free the ground.
Members of CM believe that the design of cities should divide living, working, recreation, and transportation.
This is the model.
Yeah, well, just the.
You mean there's a too flattening of everything in the first half of the 20th century?
No, this is definitely their mentality, but their idea that they can just like, just put towers in the park, and then people will automatically use and occupy the space in between and activate it. That just doesn't really jibe with the way that people actually use cities. Like,
well, it's not discussed. I think I chose this one to save because, or at least because it was recommended, I guess, because I don't know if there's anything better, but what isn't fully explained is just that it's all in the implementation. If you, I mean, I will readily admit that the writings of, say, Corbusier and others in Siam are dreadfully top down, and missing a lot of humanity, I guess. I don't know, but I mean, they were humanitarians and they were socialist leaning, at least state socialist, I guess. But and it is about centralizing, but they're following the mode of production. The mode of production in this era is centralizing. It is top-down organization, the corporation, the state. That the crisis of capitalism in the interwar era is being solved through the central planning of the economy, whether it's bourgeois liberal democracy or Soviet state capitalism.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that central planning part of it. It's just that they don't seem to understand how cities actually work. It would be one thing if they had all this density, but then they had convenient stuff and activated neighborhoods like all over the place. But
okay. So actually, I just thought of what the critique is, that you have these architects. Okay, they can design and think about houses, and there was in the past. Okay, this is not. It's a modern invention to separate the architect, the planner, and the landscape architect.
It's true. Yeah.
And a lot of the ugliness of our cities and everything in suburbia is the separation between these roles. In the past, these were all the same person. And the Siam folks were also thinking in the terms of, I am the everything designer. So even though the role could be in the mode of production, just the designer of the homes, they also saw themselves as designers of cities, because cities up until this point were not actually designed. The closest you get is the Haussmann plan, which was just the renovation of the Paris boulevards, or the creation of them rather, which was a reactionary, we have to break up the tight blocks where rebels can hide. We want wide boulevards that tanks can roll down. or the National Guard. Like, you can't build a barricade across the boulevards. It's all about stopping barricade, and thus you can't really create a fortress city. That's why it's one of the reasons the commune couldn't really defend itself. Anyway, Haussmann was like decade before, but the vision was that things would be between the towers. That there would be shops, stores, mixed-use stuff, crècheries, a new word I'm going to use a lot now. Basically, a French word for daycare.
I haven't heard that word before.
But daycare is sort of a cringe word, right? It's just like it's a caring for kids during the day. Yeah. But it's like while you're at work, right? Yeah, a crècherie, or maybe a English equivalent word needs to be created for a childcare facility, but not sounding so bureaucratic. So why don't we just borrow a word and use crècherie? The Family Abolitionist, which I finished the Family Abolition book / pamphlet, talks of revolutionary crècheries, of childcare being shared by a community. So you have these places for doing that. That are not just a service for for the professional workers, but a place for everybody.
Right.
and whatever revolutionary group like Co-op Jackson, a childcare facility is part of their program. So anyway, it's sort of it's all in the implementation, and it was in the implementation that it was just towers in the park and nothing else.
Yeah.
Or maybe a one-story shop or two.
Right.
To see how it could work is to look at more progressive or socialist cities like Vienna. Vienna's social housing versus public housing.
Okay.
They didn't do public housing like this or what we did in America, where it's for the poor and it is a form of welfare and thus dependency and all the critiques that even conservatives have. But it's social housing. And the social housing had all the community functions that the public housing doesn't. Or if it did, it was shit. And also public housing, like the Dermer, I suppose, and it goes into it. This video goes into it. How underfunded and neglected they were. So let's continue.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I believe we've watched videos on the stream in the past about, I don't know if it was Vienna, but it was someplace where they had large towers, but they would have spas and like recreation centers and all sorts of things within the tower. So it was a much different concept for public housing.
Yeah, the Soviet Union, I mean, has things like that, and they haven't blown up any of their public housing, right? It's all still there, and they also had social clubs and community centers, which we really need to be building again because the privatization is destroying. Just a conversation about, like, I was listening, I was on the slopes, and of course skiing is no cheap hobby. But I was someone talking about, like, as an alternative, this is like on the way to the parking lot, they were talking about the rents for like taking up wrestling or soccer, and that there were rents involved with that, like to get weekly mat time at the gym or something or whatever. It's like if you are not a kid at a high school, but even then it's limited by whatever budget they have, you have to pay some kind of rent if you want to do any sports or art.
Right.
It's bullshit.
Yeah.
What kind of lives are we? It's up to you to earn enough money to have any kind of hobby, or you have to scrounge for crap or do it in some haberdash way, but it really can't. We don't. So we get more alienated when we could be doing social athletics or, more than just frisbee in the park, I guess.
Right. Well, I mean, it's that capitalist notion that any activity you're doing that is non-productive is absolutely useless. If it doesn't add to the economy, it shouldn't be. So they, parks is one of the few places you can even go anymore to just be. Parks, libraries, stuff like that.
And there's certainly not like a capital accumulating commodity, but it's a service that can be financialized. But okay, let's move on.
Yeah, let's move on.
We have created for a perfect city. High-rise buildings give room for green space among large populations. Zoning separates housing, work, recreation, and travel. Efficient but separated transportation connects the different zones of the city. Uniform and standardized buildings give equal access to sunlight. Large green spaces give equal access to clean air.
CM was influential, but there were few places in the world that applied their principles precisely. One of the few places that did was Amsterdam.
In 1870 ging de stad buiten de vesting bouwen. In het begin van de 20e eeuw werden er plannen gemaakt voor de toekomst. In 1935 het algemeen uitbreidingsplan. In 1958 aangevuld met een uitbreidingsplan voor Amsterdam-Noord, een plan voor Amstelveen voor 100.000 mensen en een plan voor Amsterdam-Zuidoost, Amsterdam-Bijlmermeer. Een gebied voor 100.000 mensen met industrie en kantoren, voor recreatie en voor verkeer. Stad gebouwd voor de toekomst.
In the 60s, Amsterdam had just finished the construction of 4 new neighborhoods: Slotermeer, Slotervaart, Geuzenveld, and Osdorp. These neighborhoods were supposed to increase the housing supply, but they weren't enough. Amsterdam wanted more. So the city picked a fight with the national government and a different municipality. Amsterdam wanted the Bijlmermeer in its east, but the municipality it belonged to disagreed. The other municipality wanted to merge with 2 others to make an entirely new own edge government that could hold the Red Amsterdam at bay. The fear was that if Amsterdam grew too large, the distance between the representatives and the represented would be too far. This conflict led to the Bijlmer question, a multi-hour-long debate at the national level on whether the Bijlmer should go to Amsterdam. In one reality, Amsterdam lost.
What's that, a whole few hours?
Yeah, I'm just joking based on the wording. It's like it was a multi-hour debate.
Yeah, right.
It's like, is that all it took?
But they do raise an interesting point, though, that if you want to have representative democracy at a local level, it probably should be in a compact enough area that you can reach all the representatives, or all the representatives can reach you, right?
Well, that depends on how Amsterdam government works. I mean, if the wards are smaller, then maybe the representation would be better.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a matter of just splitting the city, the metropolis up into boroughs or borough-like entities,
sure,
that would be okay too. I mean, New York City has a city council, so it's a very large city council. You have the boroughs that have their own borough presidents and borough governments.
So that's a different way you can do it. That's cool.
The Bijlmer remained in the hands of the original municipality, and the city today would have looked quite different. But in this reality, Amsterdam won.
The Bijlmer is the city of the future. As opposed to those cramped, polluting streets in the center, we've built a city in a park. Residential homes are separated from industry, but you can easily get to your work by using raised...
Another quick architecture history note is to understand just how bad cities really were at the time, like before 1930s. They were dirty, cramped, awful places, hellscapes. And polluted and dirty and noisy, and just like, this does look like heaven. I mean, this is a denser suburbia. You know, it's the best. It's supposed to be the best of both. Suburban like land use, as far as like how much greenery there is, but dense enough to actually be city scale, 100,000.
Mm-hmm.
So every modern architect was thinking along these lines, and they weren't, monsters for doing so. Their mistake was thinking, it took until the mid, the 60s for activists to figure out you could improve the urban areas. Particularly, it's just that you just didn't have environmentalism. The environmental movement and the change of thinking that occurred in the 50s and 60s was very profound. It is not to be understated. Because before then, there was no inkling that you could actually make any environment better. There was always just the mindset of conservation. And here you're taking an area that's like, pristine, you're building more, but you're doing it in a more responsible way where you're not bulldozing all trees. And this is something like you couldn't re-green the city. It was already a lost cause, or it's too polluted, nothing can grow there. There's a defeatism to it. Because you cannot imagine industry that isn't polluting and companies that aren't dumping toxic waste into any and all waterways.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids are playing, at the riverbank with wads of mercury. And lead covers everything.
Right.
So the only solution many could come to was suburbia. And then this is an urban version of it. Frank Lloyd Wright, every modern architect.
Yep. Yeah.
Thought this way.
That's very true.
Roads separated from pedestrian walkways. All a working man needs to do is leave his apartment, walk to the parking garage connected to his high-rise, and get into his car. He can do all of this without getting hit by a single drop of rain. Our traditional European cities are cramped, messy, and polluting. We've designed a place that gives you all the benefits of density without the penalties. All the positives of rural life without the negatives.
After that long fight with the national government, the mayor of Amsterdam and the rest of the city council were almost in complete agreement. The Bijlmer was not just some buildings that would change Amsterdam. It would change cities forever.
Ik hoop dat Amsterdam snel tot het inzicht zal komen dat we hier bezig zijn met een poging werkelijk iets groots tot stand te brengen. Wat onze voorouders in de 17e en 18e eeuw bouwden, was groots. Wat wij hier bouwen zal het nageslacht, naar wij hopen, eveneens als groots kunnen ervaren en beleven. We moeten de geschiedenis niet willen herhalen. We moeten haar schrijven.
The Bijlmer's buildings, road networks, bike paths, bus lines, and parking garages were all strictly set from above. The goal was space, green, and light.
A key difference between Bijlmer apartments and your traditional Amsterdam one is the amount of room. Our apartments can have 3 bedrooms, a living room, storage, and a kitchen. Old city center apartments sometimes don't even have their own bathroom. Our apartments are an upgrade. By using concrete and steel, we've been able to stack up large apartments for middle-class families. We have all the benefits of a dense, wealthy...
Like that part, that's not wrong. You know, those are really nice-looking apartments. It's a lot bigger than what you tend to see new construction even have.
Yeah, it's not the form, it's not the aesthetic. It is the mode of production behind it all, and the social infrastructure that wasn't provided.
Yeah.
Now maybe you can argue it's so tightly regulated, you can't have some market economics here, so that even if there is a need for social stuff and shops, there's just you can't just set up a stall or a new building. It has to be approved by the master planner or basically the homeowners association.
Yeah.
The levels of bureaucracy, right? And so we as left libertarians can certainly take issue as we can with all the centralizing forces of the last century. And our century is one of decentralization, whether we want to pretend we're state socialists or not, but most of us are not, for that reason that it is our zeitgeist that we're in an age of decentralizing.
Mm-hmm.
Even as it seems like centralized nation states and corporations still reign supreme. The global system, though, is not doing that. And the financialization of our economy is a decentralizing.
Mm-hmm.
The state control of it is not really there. I mean, or it is and it is in different in the ways. Like the fact that homebrew was illegal before the first round of deregulation by Carter. And then you can homebrew,
mm-hmm.
and then you can do home industry. It was, it actually was more centralized in the past. You either were in a factory making stuff or you weren't. Or it wasn't being made at all.
Right. Just want to read a comment from James. James says hi, by the way.
James is here.
Yep. Says West Virginia is confusing sometimes. Some people live under a bridge, and some people live in homeowners type area. I guess we're supposed to be like a condo.
Gated community.
Perhaps that where they pay $800,000 to $2.7 million for a house, and still have to pay a fee to ask the neighborhood president if you are allowed to have a fence and stuff like that. So, yeah, they pay a lot to be tightly regulated, I think is the point.
But it creates a community of what is it? Well, not just discipline, but of unity.
Mm-hmm.
There's rules everyone's following.
Trying to go for
there's security in that.
True. All right. Well, let's continue on in the video.
Neighborhood, but with the empty space of a rural one.
From the start, the Bijlmer was meant to attract middle-class Dutch families. It was supposed to unlock a new system of living, spacious rooms with semi-public spaces and recreational facilities, all without sacrificing nature.
Woningen met extra leefruimte. Goed wonen door meer ruimte. Dubbel zoveel ruimte als in de 19e eeuwse wijken.
On the grounds, you could find running tracks, mini parks to run and play around in, ideal for a family.
90.000 mensen in de Bijlmermeer hebben 450 hectare recreatiegrond. Met 10.000 bomen, 2 miljoen heesters.
Suburbia,
250
utopia for kids, nightmare for anyone older than 12.
I wonder how much it was even a utopia for kids. Like, sure, you got a lot of parks, but
yeah, exactly.
That's
the selling point, though. That suburbs are best for kids.
Oh, sure.
But kids then become bored out of their minds.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Looking at footage of this place, it reminds me. I was in Bloomington today, which is where Mall of America is in Minnesota. So it's right by the airport and stuff. And it is designed basically the same way. Like, there's lots and lots of density. It's very rare to see like one-story anything outside of kind of the core of it that runs along the highway from the airport. But at the same time, you can't access any of it except for by car. Like,
but you don't have the greenery. It's all parking lot, right?
A lot of it is parking lot too. So yeah, a lot of.
But you'll have these like green spaces where you couldn't actually pave over it,
right?
Because there's just water or.
I mean, there are green spaces because it is also along the river bluff, so there's a lot of natural beauty in the area. But you drive by and there's never anybody using it.
You can't access it.
Yeah, you can't access it. So.
Mm-hmm. Why would you want the river when you have the Mall of America?
Well, true.
How is that place still open? Is it still open?
You know what? I think it's just the international.
Oh yeah, the consumers,
allure,
tourists.
Yeah.
The Mall of America, after all.
We went and walked around it today.
Not the Mall of Minnesota.
No, the Mall of America. We are a national treasure. But yeah, you see actually quite a mix of people there. There's everyone from, obviously very rich people to kind of just regular folks.
Mm-hmm. I expect.
Yeah.
Let's keep going.
Yeah,
I didn't mean to sidetrack us that much.
Sure.
25 hectare speelplaats en waterpartij. Het grote Bijlmerpark.
Attention! If you or a loved one was diagnosed with not having a personal website, you may be entitled to the best website builder on the planet. Squarespace.com. Hug.
In the 20th now receive a decent. Everyone should have a personal website. My videos, Space's blogging.
Check out squarespace.com for a free trial.
The ground floor was used as storage space. This was supposed to give each resident in the Bijlmer an equal amount of privacy. Different housing corporations were responsible for different groups of buildings, leading to slight variations in the monotonous, uniform design. The hexagonal arrangement of the buildings was meant to give each building an equal amount of sunlight. Inside were communal areas and interior streets that could be used by the building's residents.
Discover our innovative 3-tiered transportation system. Dedicated roads for cyclists and pedestrians. Separate roads for personal cars, buses, and trucks. An elevated metro line between the apartments connects you to the heart of the city. To further streamline movement in the neighborhood, we've constructed alleys under the buildings so that you can bike and walk beneath them. There you can find a stray junkie who is illegally occupying one of the apartments.
That's a weird turn right there, right? Because
it
seems like this is his script. This isn't like some. It makes it seem like this is some kind of promotional video, but you can tell, like with the Squarespace ad, that's awesome. Like it's all him.
It's all him
writing this.
But I was thinking the same thing. It was like, oh man, I bet that tunnel is not the safest looking place at night. Who knows how safe it really is.
Well, it didn't become one because I think what I like about this video is, or what I like about this case study is, because you can look at the ones in America. There's a documentary just about Pure Out Igo, the ones in St. Louis, that when they were demolished, because they were demolished like a decade after they were built, were a symbol of the failure of modern architecture. But really, it's a failure of the racist welfare state in America. Because essentially it was housing that Black people moved into, and then the funding was basically just cut from underneath it. So there were no programs. When something broke, it wasn't fixed. So if you don't do maintenance on a house, even after a decade, it will be shit. No programs, no social issue. There's just nothing. So this is a case of what you mentioned. This was the Siam vision done to the letter. It was actually done properly, or at least as best as like in the form. But I think what the architects were assuming, and something that was out of their control, and the fact that they weren't social scientists, they couldn't predict, was the political side of things and the underfunding of it, and how the economy really works and how the social housing will be supported. They kind of become environmental determinists in that the architecture is what matters, when they keep saying a new form of living, a new system, as if just changing the building form is changing the way people live and think. Socialist realism kind of actually and fascist architecture all have this in common. And also Democrat and liberals too, to some extent, especially the ones that are all Adorno heads. Culture is what determines people's psychology, and that includes the architecture. I'm very much of a poo-pooer on that, because there's just so much else involved.
Oh yeah.
I think it's madness to just say it's like culture determines politics or psychology, and the psychology determines the politics. It's all it's as funny duddy as the TERFs saying like there's biological sex and there's this biology, and that's science. Science is the biology. So these people who want to change their gender, they're not following natural law. And they're not doing what's to their nature. Where have all the lesbians gone? I just listened by chance or fascination, listening to these TERFs talk about like what they really believe and just how limited their way of looking at things are, and just how annoying they kind of come off. And they come off as pretty reasonable in one moment, but then they'll kind of say something like, they'll talk about whole social movements as fads or a culture, like just a trend, or it's like, and someday all these people, you'll just have a bunch of women with their tits cut off, and they'll just have to, and that's the suffering that I am warning against. as if they're all doing it because they feel just like it's the fun thing to do. And they're like, and they keep this woman just like, all of my lesbian friends have all become trans. It's terrible. There's no lesbians. It's like they're afraid to be women. It's against women, and that's one of where the TERFs are coming from. That's like, it's anti-women to say that a woman could become a man. Because a bunch of their friends, like some of their queer friends, have done this.
Yeah, it just sounds like personal grievance, right?
It's
selfish reasons, yeah.
When they talk long enough, or from the get-go, it's all their personal experience, but then they'll also say, but the science is by chromosomes, and you can't. These are things that can't be changed, and the fact that you could change your sex when you're not changing your chromosome, total. Yeah, they don't. Okay, anyway.
Yeah.
But it ties into modern architecture in a way, because you have a similar narrow.
It's kind of like architectural essentialism, where you build it in a certain
biological
way.
Essentialism.
People will behave a certain way if you just configure the building and they'll just love using this.
The assumption is people became fascists because they lived in like urban hellholes.
Yeah.
Or they go reactionary because it's doggy dog and competitive. So if people were in nice environments, they'll act better, or they will be nicer. Forgetting the mode of fucking production, or not being economists or sociologists. And that's why, as an architect, I really liked my field of study, because it was pushed on us that architects study multiple fields. Like, we're one of the few professionals that cover anything and everything that matters or could matter. And I was kind of surprised more of my peers weren't politically active or politically minded, but that's just part of my background. But obviously the politics mattered. and the economy matters, and the mode of production matters. And so I thought it was kind of really troubling how little that kind of factored into how we were designing, as if we were teching a solution to climate change. Even though all my professors were like, but we need people in charge to implement these changes.
Mm-hmm.
That doubling up the infrastructure is only possible with friendly government.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, ignoring the economics of it.
Okay, so here's a map of like where the Belmer is in relation to the rest of the city. Even though you have this kind of dense, super urban area,
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of on the fringes,
in the non-city.
That it's giving way to.
Yeah.
A lot of middle-class people do not want to live in the B Bijlmer. Our apartments are empty, our construction has been delayed, our metro isn't finished yet, so the Bijlmer is separated and alone.
The planners planned incorrectly. The Bijlmer did not attract the amount of people that were expected. Many households were turned off by the large alienating high-rises, so they left for recognizable suburbs instead.
The Bijlmer flats had to compete with semi-detached houses in several rapidly developing small towns surrounding Amsterdam, like Purmerend and Almere. Why the fuck would anyone go to Purmerend and Almere?
Maar ook ik kan er niet omheen. De Bijlmermeer functioneert op tal van plaatsen niet. De wijk kan niet meer concurreren op de Amsterdamse woningmarkt. Ze functioneert niet door haar hoge woonlasten en door het ontbreken van tal van voorzieningen die het wonen in de hoogbouw mogelijk moeten maken.
If you get an apartment now that the housing corporations are desperate to rent, it will definitely be worth it in the future. Just make sure you don't spend too much time in the parking garages, under the trees and in the alleyways beneath the buildings.
The prices in the Bijlmer were too high to justify moving to such a radically new place. People were less enthusiastic than the planners had thought.
In het geval van de Bijlmermeer is dat het moment waarop de leegstand onrustbarend groeit.
Ik wil graag erkennen dat er iets moet gebeuren aan de groei van de leegstand.
Vacancies led to delayed rents and high turnover rates. The neighborhood spiraled.
En door de groeiende huurachterstanden financiële problemen ontstaan voor corporaties en overheid.
So
it looks like they'd built a significant portion of this at the time that they're finding this crisis. Why then does not the government just step in and be like, okay, if you guys can't make it work,
let's finish the public amenities and fund them.
Yes,
because like public amenities, public as in the government's funding it,
right?
So, but it's housing corporations that are managing it.
Yeah,
these
so
are businesses.
Why not take over that and just house people that?
So it wasn't public. Actually, that's the great thing here, or the thing to recognize that I was forgetting. This is not public housing.
Mm-hmm.
It's on the market. It's market housing competing with traditional but still suburban new housing.
Yeah.
And the new housing, even a suburban or not high rise, are likely still larger and doing all the things that the modern housing does, but just not the same density. But somehow meeting the housing demand. So the fact that there's vacancies means, but again, it mentions high rents. You know, you have to be middle class. It's a particular, but if there's people with money renting these, that's what attracts certain crime. And if the metro isn't done, then it's not part of the urban fabric. And this is something part of urban planning, but also not just the architect's fault, because they weren't really the ones doing this. But it was also, again, seeing the hellscape of the city was part of how you had uses next to each other.
Mm.
The toxic waste plant next to the tenements.
Yeah.
So separating
that makes
them
sense to separate that
is
stuff,
all part of modern planning.
Sure.
But if you keep all of that separate while you're putting open space, while you're actually keeping the industry somewhere else, you have higher housing, but no commercial, no public amenities.
Right.
So if there are schools aren't there,
right.
You can't walk to anything. It's there's a lot of distance between everything because these complexes are large. It wasn't small. It was too big, these forms and whatever. or the size scale is fine if there's a similar density of amenities.
Exactly.
Supermarkets and this and that and that.
Yeah,
and you
yeah.
don't have to go
Stuff
into
for
the
daily
main
life.
city to get something.
Right.
But all of this wasn't there. So either the corporations failed to attract tenant businesses, or the city, which was in charge of it, of the land anyway, didn't fund schools there or something. It's just like, so the video is limited in explaining how bad things were, why, but simply it was bad. And what I don't like, as far as analysis goes, is to blame it on the form. To say that it was the form and top-down planning.
Yeah.
When it's just a failure of execution.
Sure. Yeah.
And
absolutely.
I'd like to see, and so I guess there's a sort of like fallacy of like there's no true top-down urbanism. It's like, oh, it just wasn't, communism will work, it just hasn't been done right. Or in this case, tower in the park housing is good, but it has to be done right, and it just hasn't been done right.
See, I feel like it wouldn't really take that much either. Like, they left such a significant amount of space between these towers that they could infill it with, you know, civic plazas, libraries, schools, whatever you want. Like, it doesn't all have to, if nothing of it is going to work and no one's going to go there anyway, what's the harm in taking back some of that green space for amenities?
And I think it's not on the scale of a whole city, but we have plenty of condo towers and upper class housing that is tower in the park.
Yeah.
And if you cluster a bunch of them in a whole area around a highway junction, is that not the form? But it works.
Yeah, right.
For the people who can drive around and the mall is there, and you know, the amenities that they can afford or would buy in the marketplace. And I can also point out in China, tons of high-rise construction with community centers, and the shops and stalls are all along there. I mean, in the way in New York City, the tower and the parks that have survived, because none of them were demolished in New York, though they never had a good reputation, but that you can blame the entire neglect of the city.
Yeah.
Today, you'll have a block of bodegas circling around the whole thing. So you're only a 5-minute walk from everything you could ever want to get. And you have the daycare and community center and the basketball courts there and whatever. And now they're very high in demand. But unfortunately, HUD is basically not really funding new towers anymore. Like, they just want them to age out like nuclear plants.
Yeah.
So we're demolishing some of ours in Albany.
Are you?
Yeah, they're basically not going to fund the elevators need to be renovated again. You know, like every 20 years, you have to basically renovate. And they basically said, we're not going to fund that. We'll fund the demolishing of it. So there was a plan to kind of build replacement mass housing, but now, like, the talk is of the community college building a complex there, but the neighborhood's like, we don't want the community college here. We want housing. We're out of housing. There's no affordable housing. The community college is across the river, yes, but there is a bus that goes there. If we can get to the community college,
sure,
we don't need it here to get better educated. You know, what we need it to be is free, and then we'll all go.
Absolutely.
So the whole, like, we don't need more education, actually. That's not the solution to our poverty.
Well, no, it couldn't be. Not
alone anymore. Not without capital investment.
Yeah.
You know, it's meaningless without capital investment. Though opportunities can be created by being educated. Some of those opportunities are political revolution.
Yeah. Right. But I mean, you always need the most people at the bottom in capitalism, so it just structurally cannot ever.
More likely, it's like go get a, trades. Anyway.
Yep.
Let's finish this. Yeah, you've seen how it's done the tone shift now.
Maken een te groot deel uit van de totale woonlasten.
The public amenities that were promised became too expensive without money flowing in from paying residents.
Nou, ik betaal geen parkeergeld omdat de voorzieningen die zijn niet zoals beloofd is voordat wij in de Bijlmermeer gingen wonen.
The parking garages, which were supposed to be such an innovative addition, became instead areas of concern.
Op eenmaal toe hier gaat het mijn auto dus in de parkeergarage opengebroken is en artikelen uitgestolen zijn. Dus ik weiger hiervoor te betalen.
The alleys beneath the buildings and the interior streets became increasingly difficult to maintain.
Hun binnenstraat een puinhoop is, omdat ze hun box of een collectieve ruimte niet kunnen gebruiken, waar ze wel voor betalen, omdat de lift het weer niet doet.
A place that was intended to attract middle-class families just didn't. It attracted poverty instead. The Bijlmer's design and negative stigma created a self-fulfilling cycle. The nature, alleys, and parking garages helped criminals get away with crime and made people feel unsafe. Poverty reduced its attractiveness, separating the neighborhood even more. In 1975, Suriname, a former Dutch colony, became independent. People fled to the Netherlands to escape the power vacuum that was developing in their country. But when they came to the Netherlands, they were welcomed with a cold hand.
Maar één ding. U kunt niet wonen in Amsterdam. U kunt niet wonen in Den Haag. Niet wonen in Rotterdam. En niet wonen in Utrecht. Die plaatsen zitten mutvol.
No better place to put this new group of people than where the existing residents didn't want to go anyway. The Bijlmer became known for its poor and stigmatized migrant population.
Uitzonderlijk hoog scoort de Bijlmer negatief dan op het punt van onveiligheid. Het gebrek aan winkelvoorzieningen werd genoemd. En er werd ook genoemd, een beetje eufemistisch misschien, er wonen een ander soort mensen dan ik en daarom wil ik er niet wonen.
In Gliphoeve, one of the buildings, about 90% of its tenants had a Surinamese background. Migrant families tended to be larger, which led to overcrowding and also increased pressure on the public facilities that were already weakened. The Bijlmer ghettoized. It turned into an isolated, stigmatized, underprivileged urban area. In the 70s, the city pursued distribution policies, spreading out new incoming Surinamese migrants.
Because it is discussing the social issues as well as just the injustices surrounding it. So it's not tied to the building form.
Yeah, but it also does still kind of present it in a way that's kind of essentializing, like, well, things were bad and now we've put a bunch of pores in there,
Yeah.
so of course
And now it's even worse.
Yeah.
Yes. And nothing could have been done.
No,
It's a
there's
natural,
nothing to do
it's a-
about it. Yeah.
It's a natural result,
Right.
based on the human condition that white Dutch people will not want to live next to their former colonial subjects.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Half of which they inherited from the well, no, most they gave to the English. But like Indonesia wouldn't let go until the bitter end.
To other parts of the city.
What a
I
pretentious
watched a
video
Dutch
essay.
war movie.
Oh,
I watched a Dutch war movie that is about the Indonesian occupation, and it's basically like this troop, and he's basically watching it's like the separation of the. Well, I guess it's complicated, and I skipped a whole bunch of it. I skipped half of it, I think, because I just wasn't enjoying it. But it begins and ends with the images of them kind of returning home, and nobody likes them.
Yeah.
Oh no, and it also ends with him killing like the guy who was sociopathically like killing locals. You know, really enjoying the slaughter
That's nice.
and war criming.
Way of saying that entire groups of people were banned. You're not seeing the bigger picture. It's not our fault that other competitive housing developed, or even that multiple housing corporations fragmented and delayed construction. In Amsterdam's center, there's always eyes on the street. In the Bijlmer, we just didn't have enough eyes.
When there's lots of people, there's social control. It becomes harder to litter when you feel like there's other people holding you accountable. However, the Bijlmer's advertised spaciousness and privacy became its biggest enemy.
Now, of course, if everyone litters, that's a false assumption, right?
Yeah.
If everyone's okay with littering, or if there's an assumption that somebody is hired to clean,
Right.
so you'll litter or what have you.
I mean, look at a movie theater after any showing. You find crap everywhere. And there's tons of people packed in there. Like, I don't know about some of these assumptions.
Oh yeah.
Planners tend
Well,
to make.
that's people aren't watching you litter.
Yeah.
You're unseen. It's dark. But it's also assumed like there's someone coming in to clean
Right.
after. Now, of course, you might want to have solidarity with people, and so yeah. But
Well, I mean,
guess what?
people dump
Middle
stuff all over the
class,
highway.
middle 20th century, middle class person, not much solidarity not encouraged, and not supported by the architecture, I guess.
Yeah.
But architecture alone doesn't create solidarity.
Right.
I figured that out through reading of much theory, and that's kind of why I stopped caring about being an architect. It's like, I'm not going to solve social problems with architecture as much as we pretend we are. We totally not.
No.
I think, you know, all the people, the magazines and the star architects, they're like, oh yeah, we're solving social problems. Fuck off. No, you're not.
No, I mean, it really
You're
takes
just
social policies
yeah.
to even address them, and then complete change of economic production to really solve
Yeah, but
it, so.
But certain intellectual heroes, they're former architects, and you know, they changed the world a little bit. So,
but yeah, just the idea that there's some social stigma about doing this or that, I think that only really applies if you feel like you're in a community where you see the same people every day, and like, you know, Mr. Johnson across the hall sees you littering and says, "Oh, hey, wait a minute," because he's built a rapport with you,
and there is something to be said for some kind of homogeneity of culture.
Yeah,
I'll make that clear. Culture, not much else. It was brought up to me by a friend, local activist. She's been really busy, actually, being with activist stuff, fighting for criminal justice stuff and whatever. And she's been doing direct lobbying, so she's not like adversarial with the Democrats or whatever, more or less. But she's of multiple minds because, you know. And she kind of mentions how in our local area that there's maybe some geography, like she kind of expressed some geographical determinism that when I mentioned like Co-op Jackson, her reaction quickly was, or at least at face value was like, I don't know if that can work up here. We just don't have the growing seasons that people in the South do when they're doing permaculture stuff. You know, it would take more supplies, or it would like I pushed back against her, of course. I said, like, well, if high tunnels we can in greenhouses, we can overcome all of that. And it's not a matter of what our microclimate is. But she pivoted, and also she was also expressing that like our local culture is just not communitarian. And it got me talking about Bethune syndrome, that our material culture here in all upstate New York goes all the way back to the Dutch and their supremacy of capitalism, right? Which was feudalistic, which was land hoarding and whatever. And that's still like our mode of production here in the city is still like that. Our base culture is a population that is fearful, anxious, intercompetitive, defers to authorities too easily, out of fear that things would be much worse if you didn't. And you're always fighting uphill to do anything to build community.
Right.
And so it's like, what, give up on this area because it's hard? I don't want to think it's so like, what is it determined by? And is this like, is it fate? You know, is it the weather? You know, that Yankee, it's that it's in this above the Mason-Dixon line that you have Yankee culture. Is it really just because I see it as cultural spread over a geographic area going west because of the waterways, the Great Lakes and what have you.
Sure.
Not just because we have cold winters. But maybe there's an argument there. I would have to read up. But what social scientists are looking at that. That hospitality culture is only in warm climate areas. But, you know, look at maps of, well, the world even, where like you have hospitality cultures, and it's like, well, it's when they're in warmer places, there's always way more abundance. It's in cold climates that people are like really like, that's where prostitution took root.
Yeah, but I don't know. That's
you're on
kind
your
of a
own.
modern conception of things because we are so far removed from agricultural process. In cold climates, they just used to store food a lot better. So, like, you still had to rely on community storehouses, especially like if you're talking the Iroquois or any of the native populations, they rely on community.
They had the same they had the same zone as us, and,
exactly.
And they have a completely different material economy.
Exactly.
So yes,
so
it is. Yeah, I blame the Dutch.
Yeah, let's just blame the Dutch. Right?
There's two kinds of people I hate: those that are racist and the Dutch.
Yeah, one of the best running gags from that film.
I thought it was the only one.
Yeah.
Or rather, it was just a line. I don't know if it was a gag that kept coming back.
Oh yeah, because Goldmember was Dutch, so it kept coming up, and just how creepy.
Oh yeah, that he is Dutch. Yeah. Okay.
Ja.
Ik vind het juist goed als de boel controleerbaar blijft en niet zulke hoogbouw waarvoor ze de Bijlmer ingeschat hebben. Je ziet dat het helemaal niet te controleren is.
Not enough people meant not enough eyes on the street. Not enough eyes on the street meant that the Bijlmer had more crime. Hyper-focus on the crime, and then people don't want to go outside. Not enough people.
It's just ridiculous. Like, we could imagine all of these being taken down and a suburban grid being put up in its place, and just put the same people there with still the lack of access to amenities, and you're just going to reproduce the same problems again. Like the form.
We will have suburban ghettos.
Yeah, right.
In the future, and they're starting to develop. They're in the forms of trailer parks or
absolutely
certain suburbs where it's now uncouth to be there, or it's lower cost. Maybe it's from pollution.
Yeah, it's virtually always lack of access to material comfort that produces crime, not the other way around.
Yeah.
People go outside.
Well, the market won't invest where there's crime, so
yeah, supposedly
you don't. You
they,
get
they
then you
use that as an excuse.
Then you won't have material comfort.
Yeah, right.
Suddenly, you have more crime.
En dan moet je dus in het winkelcentrum uitbreiden en de markt in de midden. En dan zijn wij klaar in de Bijlmer. Dan gaan de mensen naar buiten en dan komen ze.
Dat als je dat gaat bewinkelen, dan is het meer verlicht. En dat geeft gewoon toch meer het idee van veiligheid. Want ik zie meer...
High turnover rates showed that the Bijlmer wasn't working.
See, the people there
place to live.
were not dumb, and they we can fix these problems.
That sounds like a great solution that lady was
We just have to do what was
Add
intended.
Some shops. You got better lighting. You have more people around at different times. Yeah.
But would any of the authorities do any of this?
I'm guessing no.
No.
Guessing the final answer is no.
Live in, but a place to work your way out of.
De mensen die in de Bijlmermeer wonen zullen zelf hun stad tot leven moeten brengen. Nu en in de toekomst.
The Amsterdam city government had been slow and waffled around ways to tackle the negative stigma for years. In the 90s, they were forced to. In 1992, a 747 El Al cargo plane crashed into the Bijlmer. To this day, it is the largest flight disaster on Dutch soil. For the residents, the crash left more questions than answers and left them feeling more neglected than accepted. It fueled motivation to demolish some of the high-rises. Almost 2/3 of the original buildings were destroyed. In their place, the neighborhood was densified with low-rises.
De Bijlmer moet niet vernieuwd worden. Ik ben speciaal hier gekomen om een beetje te lopen langs die mooie flats en dat mooie natuur.
Maar u bent bang dat dat verloren gaat met de nieuwe plannen?
Tuurlijk, als ze die gebouwen anders maken en er komt weer bomen weghalen, dan is het geen Bijlmer meer. Dan is het een meer Bijlmer of weet ik veel wat het is. Maar het is geen Bijlmer meer. Het is geen mooie natuur meer.
The original plan that made the Bijlmer special was modified. Hallways underneath the buildings were removed or made larger.
What's that?
And at least this woman, I mean, she's just a sample, of course, but like you would find people that didn't see their lives as yeah, of course we can improve things, but you gotta talk and act for us,
right?
But they're just the peasants or the proles.
Yep.
So without organized power, I guess they didn't march on City Hall, or I guess I don't know.
Right.
There wasn't a political action out of it.
The ground floors, which were meant to be storage spaces, were converted into workspaces and new dwellings. The front of the ground floors were converted into private gardens, turning public collective responsibility into isolated plots of private ownership. Today, the Bijlmer is still used as a poster child for the dangers of utopian master planning. Thank you, Glow, for the intro and outro song.
It's utopian master planning that's the problem. That's the problem. It's not the racism. It wasn't the post-colonialism. Right. It wasn't the underfunding. It wasn't, it wasn't the mash of ownership structures.
Right.
Nope. It's utopian. It's utopian master planning.
Too much planning.
That's the problem. That's the problem.
Oh man.
Don't plan. Don't hope.
Right.
Don't do anything.
Yeah. Let's just go back to regular
just use
incrementalism and let the chips fall where they may, man. Yeah.
But it's also ignoring that, like, no, it's the only way this could have happened. The only way to build enough housing was through the master planning. It was a necessity that modern architecture play out the way it did. Not to be fatalistic about it, but I mean, there's material conditions involved. So and even when you have materialists like, say, Moffin, talk of Caleb Maupin, discuss like as if the architects and other cultural forces are all like just capitalist conspiracy. It's very unmaterialist as like the cultural. It's actually mysticism, not realism. When one talks that way.
Yeah.
Or blames utopianism or master planning.
Right.
Very not materialist at all.
No, not at all. Yeah. Wow. That's an unfortunate case study.
And it's repeated a lot in America.
Oh yeah, because we just look at our housing projects and say the same thing.
Yeah. Especially post 70, but especially like a lot of stuff was built in the 60s because there was like this hope of a welfare state that worked, but that was only as long as we were accumulating capital from manufacturing. As soon as that couldn't be done anymore, all of that stopped, dead stop, and nobody could do anything about it. There was nothing to do. No capital was going to be reinvested in America. We were done doing that. It had to be financialized, and if we're going to have investment in America, it has to be from foreign nation states. It has to be Japan or China, or, it's weird that they have to invest or buy property or whatever. It's a little complicated, but it's interesting ways of reinterpreting these events.
Absolutely.
So that took about a part of an hour.
Yep.
Maybe for Black History Month, I've brought up Ballad of the Bullet.
Ballad of the Bullet.
Let's see how long although it takes, based on the transcript, it would take an hour to read it, I guess. And then, but maybe I'll just explain. So in freshman year of high school, which was technically 10th grade English, had a very cool teacher who assigned 2 Malcolm X speeches. The one being the Ballad or the Bullet, where he talks about Black nationalism, Black people buying from Black people, and we have to have our own businesses and whatever, and so on, and representation. And that's sort of the old Malcolm. Because Malcolm X is, and all these historical figures, they're not, it's wrong to flatten them. I know when you're first taught about someone, it's easier to flatten someone. But if you're going to be a mature consumer of culture, you should know that most historical figures changed as they aged, even between years. As they travel around and give speeches, they learn more, they do different things. And in Malcolm X's case, in 65, he went on a world tour where he did his Hajj, as well as toured Africa. And I don't know if this is the right speech, but I typed in world because I know world was in the title of it. And this is called Not Just an American Problem, but a World Problem.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if this is the right speech, but I was assigned 2 speeches, one before he went to Mecca and one after. And it's quite stark, the difference, because he goes from a black nationalist, like white people suck and they always suck. And, and in the beginning of this speech, he actually says, like, it's not white people, it's racism. He clarifies that it's racism that's the problem, because I go to Africa and it isn't just white people that are the problem there. There's injustice, and it isn't just white and black.
Mm-hmm.
And he says in the second speech that we can't couch our problems as a civil rights issue, because when we do that, we are limiting it to the U.S. and its incrementalist institutions. We should always phrase our struggles as being for human rights, because if we're for civil rights, we limit ourselves to allies in America, which are few, if even they exist. But if we couch our struggle as human rights on the stage of the UN, we can find allies everywhere, internationally speaking. We can find them in Cuba. We can find them in the Congo. We can find them, you talk to Nasser, and then all that stuff.
Sure.
And I found that
quality of communism.
And I really enjoyed seeing the contrast between the 2 speeches, the mindset. It was just so night and day. And it's very clear that why he was assassinated soon after.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was evolving and he was getting closer to MLK's line of thinking, and MLK was getting closer to Malcolm X's.
Right.
They were going closer together rather than apart. And he says a lot of things that are very commonsensical to us, but also some of it prescient, and other things. Oh, this hasn't changed at all. Talks about tokens and danger of tokenism. It's interesting, but I don't know if it's the right speech. It probably is, though. It's he gave it in 1965. So,
did you have that pulled up, or did you want me to pull it up?
I know I do.
Okay.
Do you want me to read the second one?
Yeah, sure. Let's hear it.
Okay. So it's not just an American problem, but a world problem. He gave it in Rochester, February 1965. First, brothers and sisters, I want to start by thanking you for taking the time to come out this evening, and especially for the invitation for me to come up to Rochester, participate in this little informal discussion this evening on matters that are of common interest to all elements in the community, in the entire Rochester community. I'm going to skip ahead. Many of you probably read last week, I made an effort to go to Paris and was turned away. And Paris doesn't turn anybody away. Anybody is supposed to be able to go to France. It's supposed to be a very liberal place. But France is having problems today that haven't been highly publicized. And England is also having problems that haven't been highly publicized, because America's problems have been so highly publicized. But all of these 3 partners or allies have troubles in common today that the Black American or Afro-American isn't well enough up on. And in order for you and me to know the nature of the struggle that you and I are involved in, and we have to know not only the various ingredients involved at the local level and the national level, but also the ingredients involved at the international level. And the problems of the Black man here in this country today have ceased to be a problem of just the American Negro or an American problem. It has become a problem that is so complex and has so many implications in it that you have to study it in its entire world, in the world context, or it's an international context to really see it as it actually is. I want to pause. In Battle of the Bullet, he's always talking about the Black community, your own Black community, locally. He's super localized with what Black nationalism means. But anyway, and so this is a total departure. Otherwise, you can't even follow the local issue unless you know what part it plays in the entire international context. When you look at it in that context, you see it in a different light, and you see it with more clarity. And you should ask yourself, why should a country like France be so concerned with a little insignificant American Negro that they would prohibit him from going there when almost anybody else can go to that country whenever they desire? And it's primarily because the three countries have the same problems. And the problem is this, that in the Western Hemisphere, you and I haven't realized it, but we aren't exactly a minority on this earth. In the Western Hemisphere, there's the black people in Brazil. 2/3 of the people in Brazil are dark-skinned people, the same as you or I. They are people of African origin, African ancestry, African background, and not only in Brazil, but throughout Latin America, the Caribbean, the United States, and Canada. You have people here who are of African origin. Many of us fool ourselves into thinking of Afro-Americans as those only who are here in the United States. America is North America, Central America, and South America. Anybody of African ancestry in South America is an Afro-American. Anybody in Central America of African blood is an Afro-American. Anybody here in North America, including Canada, is an Afro-American if he is of African ancestry. Even down in the Caribbean, he is an Afro-American. So when I speak of the Afro-American, I'm not speaking of just the 22 million of us who are here in the United States, but the Afro-American, that a large number of people in the Western Hemisphere, from the southernmost tip of South America to the northernmost tip of North America, all of whom have a common heritage and have a common origin when you go back to the roots of these people. Now, there are 4 spheres of influence in the Western Hemisphere where black people are concerned. There's a Spanish influence, which means that Spain formerly colonized a certain area of the Western Hemisphere. There's a French sphere of influence. That means that the area she formerly colonized. The area the British formerly colonized, and then there are those of us in the United States. The area that was formerly colonized by the Spanish is commonly referred to as Latin America. Note yet. There are many dark-skinned people there of African ancestry, but you have to remember, these are audiences that probably weren't even like college graduates. A lot has changed in 50 years. The area, and he talks to the, just identifying West Indies. So because of the poor economy of Spain, and because it has ceased to be an influence on the world scene as it formerly was, not being a center of capitalist power ever, actually, they were totally just sending their gold to the Dutch, basically. Okay. But because of the high standard of not many black-skinned people from the Spanish sphere of influence migrate to Spain. But because of the high standard of living in France and England, you find many of the black people from the British West Indies have been migrating to Great Britain. And many of the black people from the French West Indies migrate to France. And then you and I are already here. And we just learned of the Dutch Guyanese. So it means that the 3 major allies, the US, Britain, and France, have a problem today that is a common problem. But you and I are never given enough information to realize that they have a common problem. And that common problem is the new mood that is reflected in the overall division of the black people within continental France, from the same sphere of England, and also here in the United States. So that, and this mood has been changing to the same degree that the mood on the African continent has been changing. So when you find the African Revolution taking place, and by African Revolution, I mean the emergence of African nations into independence, and has been going on for the past 10 or 12 years, has absolutely affected the mood of the black people in the Western Hemisphere. So much so that they migrate to England. They pose a problem for the English. And when they migrate to France, they pose a problem for the French. And when they already here in the States, but when they awaken, the same mood is reflected in the black man in the States, then it poses a problem to the white man here in America. And don't you think that the problem that the white man in America has is unique? France is having the same problem, and Great Britain is having the same problem. But the only difference between the problem in France and Britain and here is there have been many black leaders that have risen up here in the Western Hemisphere in the United States that have created so much sort of militancy that has frightened the American whites. But that has been absent in France and England. And it has only been recently that the American Negro community and the British West Indian community, along with the African community in France, have begun to organize among themselves. And it's frightening France to death. And the same thing is happening in England. It is, up until recently, it was disorganized completely. It's going to be an ad. So I have to give you that background in order for you to understand some of the current problems that we are developing here on this earth. And in no time can you understand the problem between black and white people here in Rochester, or black and white people in Mississippi, or black and white people in California, unless you understand the basic problem that exists between black and white people, not confined to the local level, but confined to the international, global level on this earth today. When you look at it in that context, you'll understand. And if you only try to look at it in the local context, you'll never understand. You have to see the trend that is taking place on this earth. And my purpose for coming here tonight is to try to give you an up-to-date and understanding of it as possible. So like this is no longer like a rhetorical speech, but it's like a report back. Anyway, as many of you know, I left the Black Muslim movement, and during the summer months, I spent 5 of those months in the Middle East and on the African continent. During this time, I visited many countries. First, there was Egypt, then Arabia, then Kuwait, Lebanon, Sudan, Kenya, Ethiopia, Zanzibar, Tanzania, Nigeria, Ghana, Liberia, Algeria. Then the 5 months that I was away, I had an opportunity to hold lengthy discussions with President Nasser in Egypt. And they list the other leaders. And during conversation with these men and other Africans on that continent, there was much information exchanged that definitely broadened my understanding. And this, as a high school student, like hit me hard. Like when this historical figure mentions in a speech, like this broadened my understanding. I grew as a person. I had to rethink things. That was like totally new to me. It's not something that's like presented in social studies, in big man history. Anyway, back to the speech. I have had no desire whatsoever to get bogged down. Oh, yes. Broaden my understanding, and I feel broaden my scope. For since coming back from over there, I have had no desire whatsoever to get bogged down in any pickany arguments with any bird-brained or small-minded people who happen to belong to organizations based upon facts that are very misleading and don't get you anywhere when you have problems as complex as ours that are trying to get solved. So I'm not here tonight to talk about some of these movements that are clashing with each other. This is 65 again, remember. I'm here to talk about the problem that's in front of all of us and to do that in a very informal way. I never like to be tied down to a formal method or procedure when talking to an audience, because I find that usually the conversation that I'm involved in revolves around race or things racial, which is not my fault. I didn't create the race problem. And and this is like one of his like standard lines, I didn't come to America on the Mayflower or at my own volition. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us.
Yeah.
Anyway. So in both speeches, he mentions like, I didn't come here on the Mayflower.
Right.
Or I meet some black folks that think they came here on the Mayflower.
Right.
So if we pose the problem now, they shouldn't blame us for being here. They brought us here. Applause. One of the reasons I feel that it's best to remain very informal when discussing this type of topic, when people are discussing things based on race, they have a tendency to be very narrow-minded and to get emotional and all involved in, especially white people. I found white people that usually are very intelligent until you get to them talking about the race problem. Then they get blind as a bat and want you to see what they know is the exact opposite of the truth. Applause. So I would rather we try to do and be very informal, where we can relax and keep an open mind and try and form the pattern or the habit of seeing for ourselves, hearing ourselves, thinking for ourselves, and then we can come to intelligent judgment for ourselves. To straighten out my own position, as I did earlier in the day at Colgate, I'm a Muslim, which only means that my religion is Islam. And he goes through the very basic, I'm a Muslim, which, of course, to most Americans, like, I have to explain what the fuck that means. I believe in the brotherhood of man, But despite the fact that I believe in the brotherhood of man, I have to be a realist and realize that here in America, we're in a society that doesn't practice brotherhood. It doesn't practice what it preaches. It preaches brotherhood, but it doesn't practice brotherhood. And because the society doesn't practice brotherhood, those of us who are Muslim, those of us who have left the Black Muslim movement and regrouped as Muslims in a movement based upon Orthodox Islam, we believe in the brotherhood of Islam. But we also realize that the problem facing Black people in this country is so complex and so involved, and it has been here so long unsolved, that it is absolutely necessary for us to form another organization. Oh, not another one. Which we did, which is a non-religious organization in which is known as the Organization of Afro-American. Any Black American in a program that is designed to eliminate the negative political, economic, and social evils that our people are confronted by in this society. And we have to set up, because we realize that we have to fight against the evils of a society that has failed to produce brotherhood for every member of that society. This is in no way means that we're anti-white, anti-blue, anti-green, or anti-yellow. We're anti-wrong. We're anti-discrimination. We're anti-segregation. We're against anybody who wants to practice some form of segregation or discrimination against us because we don't happen to be a color that's acceptable to you. Clap, clap, clap. We don't judge a man because of the color of his skin. We don't judge you because you're white. We don't judge you because you're Black. And by the way, this is different because like before he's like kill the white, kill white. We can't trust the white man. You can't work with the white man. That was Battle of the Bullet. So, skip me the next paragraph. Anti-segregation paragraph. Oh yeah, it's racism. Racism practiced by America. Racism, which involves a war against the dark-skinned people in Asia. Another form of racism involving a war against the dark-skinned people in the Congo. And as it involves a war against the dark-skinned people in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Rochester, and New York. Oh, and Rochester, New York. So, insert place where I'm speaking here. Right. So we're not against people because they're white, but we're against those who practice racism. We're against those who drop bombs on people because their color happens to be different shade than yours. And because we're against it, the press says we're violent. We're not for violence. We're for peace. And the people that we're up against are for violence. You can't be peaceful when you're dealing with them. Applause. They accuse us of what they themselves are guilty of. This is what the criminal always does. They'll bomb you, then accuse you of bombing them yourself. They'll crush your skull, then accuse you of attacking him. This is what the racists have always done. The criminal, the one who his criminal process is developed to a science. They practice his criminal action and then use the press to make you victim. Look like the victim is the criminal and the criminal is the victim. This is how they do it. Applause.
Still out. Yeah.
Okay, skipping ahead because he basically does a media critique that we all heard 100 times ourselves. Thank you, Chomsky. Oh yeah, and he mentions like the skill is called image making. He calls that out. And he talks about during these riots or because of these riots or after the riots. Again, the press very skillfully depicted the rioters as hoodlums, criminals, thieves, because they were abducting some property. Now, mind you, it is true that property was destroyed, but look at it from another angle. In these Black communities, the economy of the community is not in the hands of the Black man. The Black man is not his own landlord. The buildings that he lives in are owned by someone else. The stores in the community are run by someone else. Everything in the community is out of his hands. He has no say-so in it whatsoever other than to live there and to pay the highest rent for the lowest type board in place. Applause. Pays the highest prices for food for the lowest grade of food. He is a victim of this, a victim of economic exploitation, political exploitation, and every other kind. And so he goes into the same arguments that have to be made by BLM activists because apparently liberal whites learn nothing. Because they didn't learn anything before, and their parents passed down the same busted-ass worldview about riots, I guess.
Yep.
You have to say riots are the language of the unheard. It's like the fact that we have to quote these guys again and again means that there was no new thinking that had to occur or was forced to occur.
They heard
like there was
"I
no
have a dream" speech, and
like
that was it for them.
And our generation, like, who are our inspirational quotes? Like wellness practitioners and Tommy Hasty Coates and the anti-racist book writer, who's, again, these are like by marketing people.
Yeah.
Like they're not even political activists.
Mm-hmm.
Though hashtag Black Lives Matter, I guess, came from a journalist, I think. Anyway, and he talks about Congo, because this is like the year that you have the civil war in the Congo.
Okay.
Yeah, we're about 10 o'clock. So
that's a great speech. It's really showing.
Let's see if I can go to the end here, because I think he just wraps up with this is like 15 pages, and I was just going through I was on the third. Oh yeah, he talks of and he talks of how, like, the country has not done anything for us out of the goodness of its heart. When they hired us in the factories, it was because they need our manpower. He makes a joke about, like, someone called themselves a broomologist. Yeah, and it's like they didn't do it because of us; they did it because of Hitler. They didn't give us good jobs or bring us into the army. So kind of whole, like, don't let the liberals trick you into thinking they, like, give a shit. Let's see. Yeah, so let me just read that paragraph I was kind of referring to. But I went and discussed it with some of them, and they said that as long as the black man in America calls his struggle a struggle of civil rights, then in the civil rights context, it's domestic, and it remains within the jurisdiction of the United States. And if any of them open up their mouths to say anything about it, it's considered a violation of the laws and rules of protocol. And the difference with the other people was that they didn't call their grievances civil rights grievances. They called them human rights grievances. Civil rights are within the jurisdiction of the government where they are involved, but human rights is part of the Charter of the UN, United Nations. And all the nations that signed the Charter of the UN came up the Declaration of Human Rights, and anyone who classifies his grievance under the label of human rights violations, they were brought to the UN. For as long as you call it civil rights, your only allies can be the people in the next community, many of whom are responsible for your grievance. But when you call it human rights, it becomes international. And then you can take the troubles to the world court. You can take them before the world, and anybody anywhere in this earth can become your ally. So one of the first steps that we became involved in, those of us who got into the Organization of Afro-American Unity, was to come up with a program that would make our grievances international and make the world see that our problem was no longer a Negro problem or an American problem, but a human problem, a problem for humanity, and a problem from which we be attacked by all elements of that should be attacked by all elements of humanity. A problem that was so complex that it was impossible for Uncle Sam to solve it himself, and therefore we wanted to get into a body or conference with people who are in such positions that they can help us get some kind of adjustment for the situation before it gets so explosive that no one can handle it. Which is probably referring to nuclear war or whatever.
But yeah, that's really great. Yeah, he's definitely coming into the ideas of internationalism, intersectionalism, all that stuff, and he really does illustrate the power of it. So yeah, great.
It's just it's certainly depressing to know how far these men could have gone, because they were assassinated like in their at age 40,
right?
And these weren't guys who were going into academia. They were the ones that inspired the ones that went into academia.
Oh yeah.
The tokens, or the people who were trailblazers at certain times and tokens at another.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't all just don't want to flatten those experiences. But like hell. But yeah, no, all the real leaders were killed. So we're left with the people who were kind of left over,
right?
And left the muddle around, or the charlatans, or the grifters, or the people who were just not as radical or more incremental, or continue to couch it in terms of civil rights.
Right.
Sharpton is such a nothing burger because it's always a civil rights struggle, and he's bitching about New York City, or he's dealing with that bad racist white person, but nothing systemic in the struggle or anything like that.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think
all right,
so a good place to leave it for tonight. Anything you wanted to shout out or mention before we wrap up?
Donate to the Stein campaign, where petition drives are ongoing, and more money means more petition gatherers, which are very much needed. Certain states are on their way. I think there is if you're in New Jersey, you should register to vote green. They need 100 more registered greens. That's what I saw last month, so I don't know when that deadline was. So that's just on the national front. And next month in our state committee's meeting, and that includes our national presidential, it's not national, but our presidential nominating conference or convention. So we'll be choosing our delegates in March, which seems earlier than we did it last time when it was in June. But whatever, we want to get a jump on it. We want to say Stein is our presumptive nominee or something like that. I mean, there's two other guys who are also running. They have no infrastructure or anything, but they do have websites. So, and they're a little funny duddy. One of them is, unclear what the ideology is, but that's sort of the point, that it's a mixture of things. And there's always a lot of libertarian values expressed of sorts. So going from there, and of course in certain YouTube channels, they're still covering Cornel West or whatever, and it's annoying actually, because he's
about him in the last few months.
That's fine. He's obviously, the channels are nothing burgers themselves too. But the latest is just that West is basically considering anyone who's ever worked for him, and basically he blew them off. He's calling them traitors because they had the gall to basically tell him what to do, or suggest that maybe his wife or whatever family member running his campaign shouldn't be running his campaign. But it's it's the only person I can trust, because he doesn't trust nobody. And it's, as much as West is an internationalist and he doesn't believe in organization. Malcolm X believed in forming new organizations when the previous ones, like the national black the Black Muslim movement, he saw was myopic, totally up their own ass, only focused on their single little community, and just split, and they were the ones that helped the FBI kill him. So, at least allegedly.
Yeah.
Fucking bullshit.
Well, it was a good time again. I really appreciate
Happy Black History Month. May it never more be a month.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because I wasn't assigned these speeches, I think, during February. Or at least I don't remember. It was just part of the curriculum, and that's just how it should be.
Absolutely. Yeah.
10th grade English. And 10th grade English classes should include more speeches and things like that. Because it's not treated like hard literature, but it is.
Well, I'm a social studies teacher now, so I've been trying to include more speeches in my curriculum.
That's right. It would be included in social studies because it's political, but it's literature, it's writing, it's thinking.
Yeah.
I really like one good history teacher, though. English. I had another, and that was AP, so it was much higher literature stuff. But yeah, really enjoyed it. It was Mr. Dunn. Was his name, and he was a real gets his hands dirty, being the teacher in a black school, because he would break up fights. He would get he was an assistant principal before long. Yeah.
All right. Well, next time I can't wait to see what you bring, and looking forward to continuing on our ongoing conversations about these topics. So have a good one.
Thank you.
Dan.
Thank you for indulging me.
Oh, absolutely. No, it's always a pleasure.
All right. Have a good one.
Have a good one. All right. Let's get that off the screen. Turn our camera on here. Hopefully it will work. All right. Thank you all for joining me. I do appreciate it, and I will see you all next weekend. Probably be doing more Tears of the Kingdom. So until then.